The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria has raised the monetary policy rate by 400 basis points to a record 22.75%. This was disclosed by Central Bank Governor Yemi Cardoso. The Central Bank also increased the cash reserve ratio to 45% and maintained the liquidity ratio at 30%. The asymmetric corridor was also raised to plus 100 minus 700.
The committee decided to further tighten monetary policy as follows. 1. Raise the MPR by 400 basis points to 22.75 from 18.75%. Adjust the asymmetric corridor around the MPR to plus 100 to minus 700 from plus 100 to minus 300 basis points. Raise the cash reserve ratio from 32.5% to 45%. Retain the liquidity ratio at 30%.
I'm now being joined by policy and financial analyst Kelvin Emmanuel, who is a member of board of Obsidian Achina Nigeria. Great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, sir. Thank you so much.
Again on this program, quickly. 400 basis points on benchmark rate. The expectation was that it would be about 200 to 250 basis points. But we had the most aggressive, tightening of the monetary rate ever. So 400 basis points, taking it to 22.75. And then cash reserves ratio at 45%. Now, what's your assessment of all of this? Liquidity ratio retained at 30%, as you pointed out in the report. The major concern is that while what the central bank, the NNPC has done, is consistent with a global trend. Okay, you want to tame inflation, you tighten the rates. You want to check excess liquidity, you raise CRR, and all of that. But what do you think? Is it not too much in terms of implications for real sector, for lending?
Dr. Abbas, thank you for having me. So I think the increase of the MPR by 400 basis points is well in line. It's well in line with what analysts expected. I expected 250 to 300 basis points. Some people expected up to 500 basis points, which I think is well in line because the inflation to interest yield differential was about 11.1%, and it's usually supposed to stay within 400 basis points of 4%. However, what took me by surprise, because 85% of the cash is outside of the banking system. What took me by surprise is the decision to raise the cash reserve ratio to 45% from 32.5%, which is 3 times the global average. Bank of International Settlements global's average for cash reserve ratio is actually 15%. And prior to 2015, the cash reserve ratio was hovering around 8 to 15%. And between 2015 and 2024, 9 years, we've gone from 15% to 45%. And then you keep the liquidity ratio at 30%. What you're simply saying is that 45% of all the cash in the banking system is parked at the central bank. In the same year where the banks are expected to recapitalize because of the imbalance in their Tier 1 and Tier 2 additional capital adequacy requirements, I think you will see difficulties in the fact that banks will not be able to lend to the real sector, because you're basically saying that banks should focus on treasury operations. You're expecting that with the increase in CRR and you maintaining your liquidity ratio at 30%, they are going to have to just go for treasuries and ignore the real sector, and their non-performing loan book is going to rise above 7%, which is like a very strategic level that the central bank requires banks to keep their non-performing loan ratio. So and you could see that as soon as the decision was announced, like there was a sell-off on banking stocks. Most of their stocks closed in red because the outlook for the banking sector is not good. There's going to be a movement from the equity capital markets to the debt capital markets, and you could see that yields on government bonds has gone up to 21.5%. Yeah, it's an attempt to bring in FPIs into Nigeria, but the one question, and I think this is a question that was asked, that was the subject of the call that Yemi Cardozo had with the NGX on Thursday. The one question that investors are going to have on their mind is, how is the external risk of currency devaluation and depreciation going to affect our internal rate of return? That's the one question they'll ask, more than you sending the yield on government bonds above 20%.
Okay. Another thing, to tame inflation, to check liquidity, but in terms of impact, we saw results almost immediately. You just mentioned the NGX. Now, there was a dip in the all-share index. And in terms of reports by some of the companies, we've seen, very negative, outlook and report from Nestle, for example, and then MTN, the report for 2023. And if we look at some of the reasons cited here, it's about the foreign exchange regime. It's about, operating environment for businesses. Now, are we going to see more businesses closing shop as a result of this hike in interest rate? Or this is just in the interim? Should we adopt a wait-and-see attitude?
I'm not surprised at the results that the companies have declared. MTN is simply revaluation losses on dividend remittances. I'm not surprised. Nestle has a sound business because they are not as exposed as their peers in terms of the shocks from procurement for raw material inputs mostly. They are not as exposed. They have a more resilient business model than some of their peers. I don't think MTN is going to leave Nigeria. I think MTN has very sound fundamentals, despite the fact that they pay for base service maintenance, base stations that are operated by third-party companies in US dollars. They have very, very sound fundamentals. I think MTN is going to continue to grow. However, in the interim, the FX loss and the results they've declared, as well as the fact that the NCC and NIMC has required telcos to cut off users that have not linked their name to their phone line, is going to affect the stocks of these companies that are quoted going into this week that we're trading. I think this period in time, however challenging it is, presents opportunity for the manufacturing and the real sector in Nigeria, especially in enterprise manufacturing, because this whole crisis of FX and the macro environment we have from the fiscal side, which has boiled into the monetary side and as cost slowdown in business, is an opportunity for companies to take advantage of the complete lack of enterprise manufacturing in Nigeria. What the FX situation has shown, and the fact that even with capital cover to your bank today, cash cover to your bank today, most companies are still not able to open LC for import of raw materials into Nigeria, has shown that we don't have any enterprise manufacturing base in Nigeria. Most of the input that goes into manufacturing are actually imported. An example is sugar. And I can name like 10 of them that are actually imported. We import raw sugar from Brazil and India. The price of sugar has gone up drastically, and that has affected FMCGs in Nigeria. And what you have is import restriction on sugar, and only 3 companies control the import of sugar. So you have a situation where there is a 30% levy on importation of sugar. The National Sugar Master Plan is still at phase 1. It's not even graduated to phase 2. Nigeria still effectively produces less than 200,000 metric tons of sugar, and we need 1.6 million metric tons of sugar on a yearly basis. And the price that is the land, these 3 companies land sugar, that means the price that everybody else gets it, especially the fast-moving consumer good companies. So they are taking a serious beating from it. So we need to talk about the fact that the whole FX situation in Nigeria has exposed the fact that we don't have any enterprise manufacturing in Nigeria. And this is the work of the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment.
Yeah, which brings me to the point you referred to earlier on, the investors' call. That was on Thursday at the NGS. And I was going to ask, that investors' call, is that really the job of the CBN governor or the job on the fiscal side? Because one of the things that we used to complain about is the CBN carrying too much load, crisscrossing from the monetary side to the fiscal side. Should that investors' call have been the responsibility of the CBN governor? However, that investors' call on Thursday, the CBN governor was saying where they're going to pay the backlog of foreign exchange commitments, 2.2 billion outstanding. They paid, I think, 400 million out of it, so they still have the outstanding of $1.8 billion. Okay, should that give anybody any hope? Where is he going to get the money from?
Well, first of all, the investors' call. Dr. Ruben, I agree with you that you've not seen much effort from the fiscal side. Since January, the CBN has been throwing out circulars, and the market is encouraged by the attempts to tighten things. They threw out the circular on all-in rates, second check. They threw out circular on net open positions. They came out with the one on the BDCs, which is, albeit a draft circular, it's not really fully been implemented. The fiscal side, this tax to GDP ratio is still 7.1%. The chairman, Senate Committee on Banking Reforms, has read a draft of an amendment to the CBN Act of 2007. And what struck me in sections 8C of that draft is a proposal where he wants to ring-fence ways and means, which is the foundation of the whole problem we've seen today with exchange rate depreciation and devaluation. And he wants to basically say that, because ways and means says that for the first 3 months you advance money to the government, it stays as an advance that attracts 0.5% monthly. As soon as it crosses 3 months, it goes from being an advance into an overdraft account. Okay, and it starts attracting MPR plus 30. So, for example, at 22.75%, if you're borrowing government money and it goes from advance to overdraft after 3 months, it's 22.75% plus 30, which is 25.75%, which is a quarter, of whatever you're advancing to the government, and it keeps reading. So he says that money has to be paid back in 3 months, and the government has to sign an ISPO, in the irrevocable standing payment order, the federal government, on their FAC account, that the CBN will debit the money from source if they fail to pay after 3 months. I think it's a masterstroke by the chairman, Senate Committee of Banking Reforms, if they can get that through, so that in the future, the government will not violate it and continue with the problems that we've seen today. Now, let's come back to the question you asked me, Dr. Ruben. I think the Minister of Finance and coordinating Minister of the Economy needs to come with the proposal that the Committee on Fiscal Reforms has put forward. For example, Nigeria pays one of the highest telecom rates in the world by the International Telecoms Union, right? We need to bring back, there are states in Nigeria, Dr. Ruben, where you have 91, in Rivers State, you have 91 taxes and levies across federating units. Yeah? In Ogun State, you have about 44 taxes and levies across federating units.
Ogun State is business friendly.
It's business friendly, but you need to implement the reforms that were suggested. You need to raise the tax and non-tax to GDP ratio. You need to increase the number of rigs offshore to raise the amount of crude oil that you produce on a daily basis, Dr. Ruben, because if you look at the net that NNPC gets from JV, from production sharing contracts in Nigeria, Nigeria currently does less than 100,000 barrels per day, net. You also have the highest, Dr. Ruben, unit production cost per barrel at north of $45. During OBJ, crude oil unit production cost per barrel was under $20. During Jonathan, unit cost production per barrel was under $30. How has it gone up from where it was about $28 10 years ago to where it is today at north of $45 per barrel, which means Nigeria doesn't get much into its FAC accounts from crude oil exports. considering the fact that it has so many wholesale agreements that are encumbering what NNPC gets in production sharing contracts and JVs at somewhere around 600,000 barrels per day. So these are the issues we need to talk about. And these are the issues that the fiscal authorities need to implement. The fiscal authority, in going forward, the Stephen Orasanyi report from 2011 also needs to pay attention to not just cutting down the size of the civil service. They need to pay attention to reforming the Bureau of Public Procurement. Public procurement in Nigeria is bogus, and there is so much of gray areas in public procurement in Nigeria. So Nigeria needs to maybe adopt a zero budgeting system to improve procurement and reduce the amount of gray areas involved in public procurement in Nigeria.
Okay, but let me ask you to help us make sense of some of the measures that the central bank has taken in terms of managing the foreign exchange regime. Now there's been a clampdown on BDCs. I think about 4,000 plus of them, whose licenses have been suspended. And then they clamped down also on cryptocurrency platforms. Now, is this where the problem is? With the BDCs, you recall that it was under Charles Soludo as governor of central bank, as he was then, that, we had an explosion in the number of BDCs. And then over the years, they became so many. And the whole idea from the Soludo time was to see how, government could use the BDCs to manage, foreign exchange. Now, where does the abuse lie? Is it with the BDCs, many of which are originally licensed, or with the street traders? Is government looking in the right direction? And then the cryptocurrency platforms. Only recently, the federal government of Nigeria, under the auspices of the task force that was set up to address the problem of Forex, I think they fined Binance $10 million. So if you could help us unpack those two developments.
Dr. Abati, especially for Binance, is a very touchy subject. I think where the government went wrong was when, I think in 2022 or 2021, if I'm not mistaken, banned Binance from the banking system. Like, people could not open cryptocurrency accounts and then buy crypto from their banks. And then they created a P2P market that became one of the most active markets in the world. So people basically go buy USDT, and the USDT became like a shadow currency that was competing with the Naira. And these people in this market where there is practically no liquidity were making the market. They were doing what they call market making, right? So even the BDC people were taking rates from them. The efforts and coordination from the Office of National Security Advisor to clamp down on money laundering that exists in peer-to-peer currency trading is good. However, I think that effort needs to be done within the ambits of the law. I'm not going to, talk about what the law says about, arresting, and detaining people and using that as a means to, I'm not going, because all of us are very clear on the law. In 48 hours, you have to release, and you have to file charges within 48 hours. And the gray areas on the sections of the Police Act that allows for the government to get like a warrant from the court, emergency warrant to detain for this period in the interest of national security. Those gray areas exist, but we also have to be very careful.
Yeah, that's covered by ACTA,
yes,
2015.
We also have to be very careful, because we're also at the point, at a critical point where the government is doing everything it can to attract foreign investors to come into Nigeria, non-speculative foreign investors to come in and commit their capital. And all of this forms optics to investors. On the issue of the BDCs, 4,173 of them were banned because they didn't file returns. They've not kept with the act that establishes their license. I think it's the right call. I also think the decision not to outrightly ban them, but to bring them in the fold and require that they have reporting schedules, they have prominent directors. There's a limit on how much cash they can trade with. There's a limit on how much they can source, where they can source it from, is a step in the right direction. It's going to improve Nigeria's fight against anti-money laundering and a CFT, which we're currently has a grey status in Nigeria. I think in 2022, Nigeria was reduced to a grey status for AML CFT. It's going to help. However, the major call for our exchange rate and where it goes from here, the forward guidance for the exchange rate, which is the number one topic across boardrooms in Nigeria and across boardrooms also abroad where they have capital committed to Nigeria, is the FX rate. Where is it going to go next month, next 6 months? How do we commit capital? Where do we, hedge this or hedge that? It has to do with liquidity. And for us to address the issue of liquidity, we need to come back to the fiscal side. We need to talk about the fact that today, the government-owned enterprises, Dr. Ruben, America 7 years ago was a net importer of LNG. In 2024, America is the number one LNG export country in the world. Within 7 years, OBJ built the 6 trains that NLNG has between 1999 and 2005. So when this government comes and talks about the fact that it's been trying to build Train 7, just one train, Dr. Abati, to add about 8 million metric tons per year, we already have 22 million metric tons, which has a 60% capacity utilization. I wonder what they are talking about, because how did OBJ build 6 trains between 1999 and 2005 in 6 years? How did America build LNG capacity of nearly 200 million metric tons per year in 5 years? These are the questions we need to talk about, because this is where you're going to get your revenues from. What is the Minister of Petroleum Resources and Gas talking about supplying gas feedstock, associated gas feedstock to NLNG? What is he talking about building floating LNG vessels to be able to directly take associated gas from wellheads, treat it, process it into C1, C2, C3, C4, methane, liquefy it and sell for currency? Because today you have, Germany came to Nigeria to look for gas. The president made promises to them, but the question is, do you have the infrastructure and the feedstock upstream? We have 5.6 billion standard cubic feet of gas that is produced in Nigeria upstream. It's not nearly enough for NLNG. Do you have the feedstock? Do you have the infrastructure to be able to serve the European market that critically needs gas in this period, given what is happening in Ukraine and given also what's happening in the Middle East? The answer is no. So these are the important questions we need to tackle from the fiscal side to be able to solve the FX problems that we have. Nigeria is more a gas nation than it is an oil nation.
Yeah, that's correct.
So in talking about liquidity for the FX market, we need to realize that our major cash cow as a country is NNPC. And until we come back to NNPC and ask them questions about how NNPC operates, why NNPC is not an operator. NNPC is no longer a policy-making government institution. NNPC is a private company. Why are they not building capacity to become an operator offshore and deep inland? Why is the Nigerian-Moroccan gas pipeline still not gone into FID? Why are they not able to go to IPO? Why are they not able to clean their books? Why are they not able to supply Dangote with the feedstock it needs? You have about 800,000 barrels of crude oil that set sail from the US. A few days ago, earlier on this week, and it's going to land in Nigeria. It's a heavy crude that has API grade of more than 35 degrees. Why do you have Dangote refinery that was supposed to use the crude oil in Nigeria to equalize the cost of landing and regulate the price of petroleum products in Nigeria and also supply other sectors of the economy with derivatives, not able to get the feedstock it needs to produce? These are the questions. Dr. Ruben, I am shocked that the president is not summoning the ministers of petroleum and gas resources to the villa and asking them, why are these questions not being answered? Why do we have these problems?
Well, questions. But I hope some people are listening. But let me ask you, the dollarization of the Nigerian economy, there are economists who have complained again and again that something is wrong with the fact that the Nigerian economy is dollarized. Now, the excuses I've seen out there, Ports Authority, for example, saying, well, it's international business that they do, and so people can pay in dollar. The transaction is dollar denominated. But what international business are supermarkets, real estate developers, landlords doing that everybody quotes in dollar in Nigeria? Is that really a problem? And what is the real value of the naira? Because you recall that famous statement by the CBN governor that the naira, is undervalued and all of that. How do we find the real value of the naira?
Dr. Ruben, finding the real value of the naira has to do with the forward curve, and you can't find your forward curve without liquidity in the markets. On the issue about the rates at which custom clears duties, number one, it is my belief, and I've always said this, Dr. Ruben, that the Nigerian Customs Service has no business whatsoever collecting revenues on behalf of the government. One of the reforms that the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Reforms proposes to the presidency is to, I'm not sure, let me not say what I'm not sure of, but one of the reforms they should propose to the presidency is to take away revenue collection from Nigerian Customs Service to the Inland Revenue Service.
To take food away from customs.
Dr. Ruben, this is the problem.
Customs
because
officers.
this idea of you set up a custom act and say that they'll generate revenue and they'll keep 1% of whatever they collect doesn't all go well with me. It doesn't make any sense. Customs should be trade facilitation, not revenue collection. So I still believe that the amount of tax receipts that are collected at the ports is not a real reflection. What is declared is not a real reflection of what is actually generated. On the custom rates, if you look at the formula for calculating custom rates, the surcharge, the FOB, ELTS, if you look at the calculation of the custom rates, you see that you actually cannot calculate custom duties and levies without the exchange rate. That's why you need a stable exchange rate. But more than that, I think the circular that has been sent that custom duty should be calculated with the rate at which the Form M was issued makes a lot of sense. The problem is not the custom adjusting the rate. The problem is having a stable exchange rate. I do not believe, Dr. Abati, that customs should be under the Ministry of Finance. Customs should be under the Ministry of Trade and Investment because they are meant to facilitate trade, not to collect revenue. That's where the problem started from. Revenue collection, all revenue collecting agencies, about 62 of them, should collapse their functions back to Internal Revenue Service. Internal Revenue Service should be the only place that is taxed with the duty of collecting revenue for the government. Just like I do not believe that apart from the taxes that are collected, capital income tax, you also have, there's a second tax that the FIRS collects from NLNG. I don't believe that NNPC should be in charge of holding the stake that the federal government has in NLNG and in any other government-owned enterprises that is in oil and gas. NNPC is no longer a policy-making institution. It is a company, and that function should go to the Ministry of Finance Incorporated. These are the kind of loopholes that you need to block to be able to raise the tax and non-tax revenue to GDP ratio, reduce the debt financing, which was 16.8% under Jonathan 10 years ago, and be able to reduce how much of overdrafts that the central bank advances to the government.
In terms of taxation and the fiscal side, there's a committee, right, on taxes and fiscal issues, working on that. And they have short-term goals, medium-term goals, and all that. But I wanted you to comment specifically on this crisis of dollarization.
So, if you look at our the import bill, the import, export, and then the trade balance, Dr. Abati, we don't produce a lot. A lot of things that we consume in this country are imported. They're imported, and people have to adjust. The problem is that for a lot of what is imported, when you have stock, people have the tendency of they always change the prices of what they have in stock to reflect what the exchange rate is at the moment, not the rate at which they bought it or they landed it in Nigeria. So I wouldn't really blame them. And I don't really think it makes sense for the Federal Consumer protection council, FCCPC, to go closing supermarkets and saying that they are trying to dollarize the economy by increasing the prices of product arbitrarily. It's a free market, for Christ's sake. If a consumer doesn't like the price at which he's coming to buy, what does he do? He goes to another place to check if the prices are better.
Well, I don't know whether you go to the market. Even if you go to a market to buy something as simple as vegetables, right? The trader, the market woman will tell you the cost of vegetables has gone up because exchange rate has also gone up. What does exchange rate have to do with...
The cost of diesel is north of 1,500 naira per litre. The cost of petrol, yes, affects the prices of vegetables because you need to transport vegetables from the farm to the markets. So in one way or the other, yeah, the people are affected. The agricultural sector is affected by the increase in the price.
I get your point. Everything is interconnected,
yes.
But we see, what will happen to the naira and whether the various measures that have been adopted on the monetary side would work. But I get your point. There has to be also a proper alignment
between the fiscal and the monetary side. And so far, we've not seen that.
Yeah, and it should not be the CBN,
yes,
carrying the load,
yes,
on the fiscal side.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kelvin Emmanuel, for joining us on This Day Live, this Sunday talk show.